All right, we've got a minute and 20 seconds. Man, it looks beautiful outside, but it's awfully cold. What a way to start spring break with a tease. Am I still heard? Dang, did 3 people just get in at the same time? Wow. I feel famous. All right, we've got 40 seconds. Man, we don't have the new Mannequin Pussy. I have a couple songs, but they just released an album, and we're big fans of them here. But 15 seconds till we start. Weeks of my vibes. I mean, yeah. Save your own vibes. And we are live. We're live, I believe. You're listening to Save the Vibes live on KRUI 89.7 FM. I'm your host, Sweet Jorna, and today we're catching up. We spent all the Saturdays of February celebrating Black History Month, which did not include our regular news coverage, but I took last week off because midterms beat me to hell and back. But we're here. We made it. Spring break will be spent cleaning up all that jazz. But today we've got general coverage of where we left off in the last week of January. Last we covered of the Israel-Gaza War currently unfolding. The largest development was that Israel had performed airstrikes on a UN humanitarian shelter in the Gaza Strip. If you're one of the 3 people that is unaware of the current conflict, it was instigated on October 7th by a surprise assault by Hamas, a Palestinian terrorist organization and the political entity located inside the Gaza Strip. The attack resulted in roughly 1,200 Israeli deaths and the taking of just under 250 civilian hostages. Israel has responded with a continuing slew of bombing campaigns and a ground siege of the Gaza Strip that is still ongoing. Although Israel does have the right to defend itself, this particular conflict has garnered massive amounts of worldwide attention due to Israel's heavy-handed and disproportionate response. The latest number from the United Nations states that the death toll of Palestinian civilians has surpassed 30,000 in the 5 months since the original attack, and over 75% of Gaza's 2.3 million person population is internally displaced. Some of the developments that have come in the last month are allegations from Israel that the UN's humanitarian affiliation with Hamas and the slow-burning negotiation process between the 2 warring entities. This was a minute ago, but on January 18th, Israel brought forth allegations to the UN that its humanitarian agency, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, contained 12 individuals that allegedly participated in the October 7th attacks, as well as claims that up to 10% of the staff has connections to Hamas. The UNRWA is the largest distributor of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, with over 13,000 employees operating those efforts. Under the current wartime conditions, a large majority of the population is completely reliant on UNRWA for food, medical aid, and shelter. These allegations, at the time, prompted 20 countries to pause or threaten to withdraw their funding of the agency, including 3 of the largest donors, the US, Germany, and the European Union. 13 of those countries have actually followed through with this, with the US as a close ally of Israel being the first to do so. The UN itself has expressed dire concerns about these motions. The UNRWA predicted that it would no longer be able to operate by the end of February, with a few smaller nations actually increasing their donations. They have moved that date to sometime in April. It should be noted that the UNRWA largely does not operate on the official UN budget. It is reliant on donations for its operations. Its stipend from the UN covers administration costs primarily. With funding on the line for the agency, the UN on February 28th explicitly called for solidarity and support in getting funding to UNRWA. They have also stated that Israel has provided no evidence for its claims, but it has since suspended the contracts of the specific employees pending an internal investigation. In that same statement, they called the allegation and the following funding withdrawals a smear campaign. Those comments were made just a day before the events on February 29th, in which 112 people were killed and over 700 more injured in what is being termed the Flower Massacre. Upon an overhead aid drop that was located in southwest Gaza City, Gazans swarmed the crates in search of much-needed supplies, this one containing cooking flour. Remember, this is a chronically starving population. Israel claims that the deaths and injuries were a result of crowds stampeding and trampling one another. However, there is on-the-ground footage of people being shot at, being shot at while collecting aid. The UN has verified at least 14 instances of the IDF targeting people seeking aid, opening fire on aid convoys to prevent the entrance of aid into Gaza at all. The UN has stated that it takes Israel's allegations seriously, but these are some of the conditions that the agency is dealing with on the ground amidst the mass withdrawal of funding. Now, what can be gathered from any of this? First, it's generally known and accepted that the US and other major global powers are hypocritical when it comes to everything political, especially on the international playing field. But this feels absurdly malicious. I want to clarify that we're stepping a little bit into more opinionated territory here. I encourage all consumers of the news to formulate their own opinions on the information that they receive, so treat this no differently, but this feels malicious. The largest donors of what should be a non-political issue have pulled what they know are essential funds from objectively the largest distributor of humanitarian aid to a severely malnourished, disease-ridden, and homeless population living in a still highly active war zone, all allegedly based on allegations for which we have seen no evidence yet. This is quite cruel, and I don't think that's radical to say. As mentioned earlier, Hamas, in addition to being a terrorist organization, is the governing authority of the Gaza Strip. I'll come back to the allegations about the 12 October 7th participants in a second, but for the allegations that 10% of UNRWA is affiliated with Hamas, that could potentially be true, but that's just the reality of living in Gaza. I am not vouching for Hamas's actions in any way, but I don't believe the general public has been told the nature of these relationships. In the 10% of people, that could mean that a staff member's dad was a government official, not an active terrorist, and, they called him. And Israel traced that call, and that's a personal affiliation with Hamas. Any affiliation with the government is essentially affiliation with Hamas. They are a legitimate political organization as well. As for the 12 UNRWA employees, their participation is indeed a serious allegation. However, defunding the entire agency is collectively punishing the 13,000 member staff and the remaining people of Gaza from the actions of literally 0.001% of its employees. Israel's campaigns have killed a confirmed 158 UNRWA employees alone since October 7th. That is 13 times the number of people allegedly involved in the siege. This phenomenon of collective punishment really seems to be in the air, and one of the worst parts about it is that it's happening under the assumption of guilty until proven innocent. Moving back into news, the White House for several weeks now has been consistently reporting that negotiations with Hamas are nearing an end, but the talks are looking otherwise. The most recent round of negotiations to end the war and to release all hostages between Hamas and Israel took place in Cairo, Egypt, lasting 3 days. And unfortunately, it ended on Tuesday without reaching a conclusion. The two primary mediators, Qatar and Egypt, were hoping to achieve a 6-week ceasefire with the release of at least 40 of the most vulnerable hostages being held by Hamas by the beginning of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which actually begins tomorrow at sundown, despite the circumstances, Ramadan Kareem to everyone who celebrates. The last ceasefire achieved was The week-long one in December, which facilitated the exchange of 100 hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, cumulatively taken by Israel over, years on end. However, the recent talks were off to a difficult start, considering that Israel did not even send negotiators to be physically present. The public, of course, is not being let in on the complete details of what the clauses of this negotiation are, but the 6-week ceasefire and release of all hostages remains the priority of at least the U.S. in its position in these negotiations. Jumping back into slightly more opinionated territory here, these do not look like negotiations. For one, Israel did not even show up, and this is a two-party job. We are continually hearing from media sources, White House officials, and the Israeli government that the ball is in Hamas's court. That is fundamentally not how negotiations work. It takes two to tango. If the decision is solely up to Hamas at this point, that's not a negotiation. That's a deal. That's a contract. I do not find the Washington Post to be the most reliable source for unbiased information in this conflict in particular. But in an article by Ben Brosh, Lior Soroka, and Daniel Wu, described the negotiations in the most plainly accurate way. Quote, Hamas has said it would release all hostages if Israel withdraws all of its troops. Israel has said it will not stop fighting until it has destroyed Hamas. This perfectly describes that the negotiations seem to be at a stalemate. No one who can count to the number 10 would agree to these terms, given the current state of Gaza, its people, its infrastructure, its government. Anything other than the total end of the war would be illogical to agree to, even a ceasefire for hostage exchange. Hamas would essentially be giving away their primary mode of leverage only for the war to resume a few weeks later. The first ceasefire facilitated hostage exchanges, people for people. There is no other benefit to giving up hostages for anything other than the total end of war if Israel is not interested in another highly valuable prisoner swap. In addition, Israel has said it will not end the war until Hamas is gone. This could be political rhetoric. Israel does have elections coming up, but that speech is not useful in the negotiation process. The total elimination of Hamas means no negotiating with Hamas for the hostages. If Hamas is going down at the hands of Israel, best believe the hostages are certainly going with them. In addition, both parties have a history just as long as the origin of the conflict itself and of not committing to diplomatic agreements. Only realistic way forward is third-party intervention, and a solid and respectable end is not going to happen in these negotiations. I will get a face tattoo the day that these two parties can decide to be cordial. In other news, back in the homeland of the United States, let's talk elections. There have been several primaries that have taken place over our last month of no news coverage. Last we talked about elections, I made the naive prediction that Republican candidate Nikki Haley's results in New Hampshire would mean that maybe she had a fighting chance in future races. In that race, she was only 14 points away from Donald Trump. I said that that might influence other Republicans to lean in her direction, given that 14% is not that vast of a margin, and a lot of people don't like Trump. She was the opposition candidate. I said then that it may be stupid, and I'd come back on here in a few weeks and walk back my statement. Well, this is me doing that. She has since dropped from the race. She held out longer than expected, only doing such this past Tuesday, following the Super Tuesday vote. In the Republican primaries that have taken place since then, her lowest margin of difference from Donald Trump has been 13 points in Utah, even trailing 20 points behind in her own home state of South Carolina. She did, however, win Vermont and D.C. by 4 and 30 percentage points, respectively. In conclusion, my bad. The itch I had to gamble that prediction was just a New England thing. But in a baller move on her behalf, she kind of anti-endorsed Trump, while other Republican candidates have almost immediately endorsed him following the end of their campaigns, probably in hopes of securing a position of vice presidential pick. Haley said no, stating that it is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond who did not support him. All I have to say is, I see you, proletariat queen, pop off. What I didn't see coming was the Democratic opposition candidate. In the state of Michigan, their primaries were held last week on February 27th. Unknown to the rest of the country, there was a grassroots movement happening in the state that mobilized over 100,000 voters to vote uncommitted on the ballot. This movement was spread in protest of Joe Biden's policies towards Israel and his response to the Israel-Gaza War. The state of Michigan is home to the largest population of Arab Americans in the country and is home to the first ever Palestinian American member of Congress, Representative Rashida Tlaib. The Arab population is only about 3% of the state, but many others joined in to express solidarity, to participate in the protest, and to not vote for Joe Biden, which resulted in Uncommitted taking 19% of the Democratic vote. Side note, there was an uncommitted option for the Republicans as well that brought in over 30,000 votes, or 3% of the Republican base. That doesn't mean much, but I feel like I wasn't totally wrong about the anti-Trump voter base. Further, these efforts expanded to the Super Tuesday vote as well, with 7 of the 15 states that held primaries also having an uncommitted option. In those 7, uncommitted votes ranged from 1.6% as the lowest low in Alabama and 18.9% as the high in Minnesota. Now, I can't definitely tell you what this means going forward. Of course, as a protest vote that garnered this much attention, in a vital swing state for both parties and several other states, the goal was to hopefully influence Joe Biden into altering some of his policies towards Israel before it has detrimental consequences for his campaign in November. This is a real threat to his campaign. As big as the anti-Trump base is, the Republican Party is looking relatively cohesive in spite of Trump's lowered level of public interaction and gasps for air in between his 4 pending cases, consisting of 91 criminal charges against him. According to the Associated Press, the status of his campaign is that, in January at least, his team spent more money than it managed to take in, with much of that amount, they did not mention a specific percentage, going towards his millions of dollars in legal fees. But as we've seen from the primaries, he still has a large majority support from Republicans. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is fighting off less than promising approval ratings and heightened scrutiny over Israel and Gaza. His biggest threat is not even the Republicans, but rather his own demons. Going back to the uncommitted vote, it displayed that he's got haters too. This was a primary, and he is the incumbent, meaning that there was no other Democratic candidate to choose in place of him. I mean, there were some others, but let's be real. This will not happen in November. There is no uncommitted option on a presidential ballot unless you write it in. I don't know what will happen to the amount of uncommitted votes that appeared here. There have been whispers of talk about some Arab Americans in those generally dissatisfied with Joe Biden's response to the war shifting to the Republican side of politics. Not that this would realistically be a substantial amount of people, but it would be horribly backwards for the Palestinian cause. That's not an opinion. Trump is a large reason that Israel is where it is today. I unfortunately cannot get into those specifics today, but we have covered this a little bit before. Actually, in the last episode of Save the Vibes of January, I guess a lot happened in that episode, more than I thought. The one from January 27th, we did a brief overview of Trump's policies towards Israel. I'll try to link that on my Instagram sometime later today if anyone's interested in rewatching that one. It's not a total deep dive, but a decent introduction in comparison to Biden's policies. The gist is that Donald Trump is probably one of the most pro-Israel presidents we've ever had. I'd like to think that people put more thought into their votes than this ooga wooga, no Biden means Trump logic, but we've seen how my predictions turned out last time, so I'll shut up for now. And that's actually all I have for today, folks. I'll be hanging around in the studio and on Twitch for a little bit longer, doing a little more conversational talk on the news, if you care to get in. But otherwise, Iowa City, it's a beautiful first day of spring break. The college kids are gone, except the broke ones, me, who will be indoors playing video games for the next week. We've got a hot and crispy high of 46 degrees today. Locals, don't get too crazy at McBride Beach over yonder. And if you'd like to reach out to me or stay in the loop about the show, I'm on all major social media platforms at Lenny the Fool. That's LENY_the Fool. Same on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/Lenny the Fool. Folks, have a good rest of your Saturday and a safe but crunk spring break. We'll be back next week and back to your regularly scheduled tunes. Man, I don't know what is up with my voice today. I'm feeling deep fried. Deep fried vocal cords. Marianne Williamson had good numbers against Joe Biden. I think she'd be a great president. I actually, as big of a person she is in politics, I don't know much about her, to be honest. I know she's like one of the younger people, but that doesn't say much because our other candidates are like almost 90. So she's the hip and young one, which is like 50. No offense to 50-year-olds. Sorry, Mom. Do I have a website? No. Email list we can join? No. I have Instagram. That's where I post my updates. I don't know how to do all that newsletter stuff, and that'd be cool, but I'm a one-man operation, and sometimes this show, just like today and last night, I was working on this till like 2:30. Like, how ridiculous is that? I go to sleep at 10. It'd be cool to have a newsletter. I would honestly really like to do a lot more regular news coverage, but I am a student. Should have yelled spring break at the end of the show. I don't think they would have got it, but here's your spring break. Spring break. Oh, nice sweatshirt. Yeah, the brand new KRUI drip. I didn't know that these were like embroidered. Maybe it said that on the advertisement, but like, that's not a sticker. That's not iron-on. That's for real, for real. One second, I'll be back. Okay, that's good enough. I wrote a couple of things I wanted to talk about with the chat. I could not do all this research last night or, during this week because midterms are still swinging heavy. In fact, they're not even over. But there's a couple of things on here. Guys, there's a serious TikTok ban. There's a bill. I don't know the specifics, hence why I didn't put it in the actual show. But TikTok ban. There's a serious bill. It's got the, approval of Joe Biden. He said if it makes it to his desks, he's gonna sign it. But it's pretty much an outright ban on TikTok. Basically forcing them to either sell from their parent company ByteDance, which has affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, or to leave America. I don't know what they're gonna do. I hope it gets banned. I think it should be banned, not only for social and cultural reasons, the way it's frying everyone's brains in America currently. Well, I guess the entire world, really. Everyone's on TikTok. It's frying everyone's brains, but I know people, when those congressional hearings were happening last spring, where TikTok had a hearing in front of Congress. They had a hearing in front of Congress, and Mr. Xu was, he was pretty much kind of useless. He didn't bring any information with him. But the congressional members were also being kind of racist towards him. But I don't know. I think that entire congressional hearing got blown out of proportion between people who are progressives and don't know how legal questions work. You have to ask some redundant questions to get all of the information you need. And if that means asking someone you know is Singaporean, if they have affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, then that means you have to ask it because you have to get an answer. I think there was a lot of really uninformed and stupid people commenting on that, saying they're being so racist. Some of them were. But a lot of them were just asking legal protocol questions, and they sound funny to the public if you don't know how legal questions work. But Mr. Chu was also kind of useless. He didn't bring any valuable information with him, and I think the way he played it off made it kind of garnered him some sympathy. They're like, look at this poor man, this poor man being targeted. Like he's not the CEO of a very, very powerful data harvesting tech company with affiliation to the Chinese Communist Party. I don't know. I think TikTok should be banned. The way that how much data is being harvested pretty much off of anything online, but specifically something like TikTok, something that has the potential to sway an entire culture. TikTok could alter the presidential election. It's got a lot of sway, and if that's got affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, then that's a security threat to America, and I think it's probably a little valid. That's some of those rad libs online. That's mostly, where was I going with that? It's mostly those rad libs, and some of them simp a little too hard for communism because it's like a cool idea in America now. But if you look at it, how it's being implemented in China, that's not the communism that anyone should be supporting. I don't have sympathy for the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think they proved the data gathering accusation. I think maybe they're not gathering people's specifics like IP addresses. And I'd probably gather IP addresses. The basic stuff, I think they harvest just as much data as any other company. Just like if you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, well, that's both Meta right there. If you're literally on anywhere, any social media on the internet, your data is being harvested. If you're, you could Google something and the first link you click on, they're gonna ask, verify your cookie preferences so we can gather your data. That's exactly what they're doing. And I think even if it's minimal like that, even if it's just standard data that they're gathering, if they're gathering it at the scale of someone like TikTok, how many TikTok users are there? There's probably 1 billion at this point. That's a threatening amount of data being gathered. And the influence you have on a platform like that, I think is also a little scary. So I'm kind of pro TikTok ban. I have no idea what they're going to do. If this does get approved, if the bill does go through, does get passed, and TikTok is banned, culturally, the youngins are going to crumble. But I don't know what TikTok's going to do. Are they going to leave America? Are they going to sell? Are they going to, leave ByteDance? I don't know. Wait a minute. Did that not save on here? I skipped a whole section. Of my script. I don't know how I did that. my script, I was gonna say, like, hang around, come join us over on Twitch. I'll be talking about some more things. One of the things I have in here is the Assistant Secretary of State. The Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs, Michelle Sisson, visited our campus. She was here at the University of Iowa during this week. Weird. She was here on campus, and she did a talk at the IMU, which is where we currently are, but she also visited my class. I'm in a class called International Conflict, and she came to our class, and she had, a lot of very insightful things to say. She's very knowledgeable, of course, and in a very respected position. She's been the ambassador of, many countries and lived everywhere. She seems like a very lovely lady. Very lovely, smart, professional lady, but she also is an American politician, a spokesperson for the American government. And she had some things to say about Israel and Gaza that I didn't like. I feel only slightly uncomfortable talking about what she said because, she didn't know her words were subject to being reported in a kind of somewhat news organization. But she was speaking to a class of college students, so surely she did not give us anything confidential that the public does not already know. But she was talking about the priorities of these negotiations between Hamas and Israel, which is the 6-week ceasefire, release of all hostages, and America is still solidly supporting a 2-state solution. I think all of these are dumb. Not the ceasefire, that would be helpful, but ceasefire for hostage exchange, that's stupid. Why would you give up your bargaining power and you can't even guarantee that Israel won't stop bombing you? I think that's pretty dumb. I mentioned in here that we keep hearing the sayings the ball is in Hamas's court. And so it's up to them to decide, do they want to accept this deal, accept these negotiations? And that's just not how a negotiation works. This is the same thing they've done since the beginning of the conflict, is giving Palestinians these completely is arbitrary the word? Is that the right word? These obviously dumb, you would be an idiot to accept these agreements. Which is what happened at I think some of the Camp David Accords. I don't remember off the top of my head, but some of these were just really dumb. They're just basically saying, it's none of these acknowledge Palestinians actually living on this territory and considering it their home. They're just a problem to be dealt with. And so they keep giving them negotiations, saying, here, we're obviously here in permanent, the Israel side. They keep saying these negotiations are presented in a way of obviously, we're here, we're permanent, we're not going anywhere. How do you want to go forward? Or how can we interact with you as little as possible? Which is the 2-state solution. None of these are realistic. Palestinians lived on the whole territory, and the only way to fully get that back is to integrate. There's not a divorced I don't know, if you have two warring entities sitting right next to each other and one of them is literally integrated in another section, it's the Berlin Wall. It's half of what am I trying to say? Half of the non-communists being stuck in communist territory, surrounded on all sides. That's the West Bank, pretty much, if you don't count it being, kissing up against another country. But I'm not explaining this very well. I think it's stupid. 2-state solution is not going to work. We've already tried that. It didn't work before. You can't have two people that hate each other living right next to each other. That's apartheid South Africa, and that wasn't exactly peaceful. Only solution is integration, and that's only going to happen by third-party intervention. This is at least what I believe now, People should not be afraid to change their beliefs, and I might change mine in the future, but America's so heavily influencing these negotiations, and they are still so very lopsided. Palestinians cannot get any decent deal from these people, and these Western negotiators and allies of Israel keep saying it's up to Hamas to accept our deals. We keep compromising. That's Donald Trump right there. We keep compromising. These deals are stupid. They're unequal, they're lopsided, they're not realistic in any way. And it's like they keep putting the blame on Hamas for not accepting it, when really Hamas, not vouching for Hamas, but the Palestinian people have been undercut time and time again and never given an adequate solution. She was one of the people reporting that. Like I said, she was the messenger, Michelle Sisson, in our class, saying negotiations, ceasefire, hostages, two-state solution. Those are all examples of the Palestinian people being undercut. A ceasefire, not even a full end of the war, that's an undercut negotiation, or that's an undercut clause, just end the war. Hostage exchange, if you want the hostages back, end the war. That seems like a pretty decent deal. And two-state solution, why not just integrate? Because that would, I don't know, upset the least amount of people, even though, I don't know, third-party intervention is the only way to go. At least that I see it. I realized two of these points that I wrote down here are the same thing. I said Michelle Sisson and chump negotiations. No disrespect to Michelle Sisson, but those are some chump negotiations. You're clowning people. What else happened in the news this week? Israel keeps reporting that Hamas is stealing the aid from Palestinians, from civilians, but the two are the same. They may not be civilians, but if someone's starving, they're gonna go get aid. Given how little resources are in the Gaza Strip as a whole, everyone's starving. Hamas is starving. Not that I'm trying to spare Hamas, because they are a terrorist organization, but if there's a tax for an aid drop and Hamas is gonna take 30% of it, I don't know, then let them take 30%. Get the 70%, give the other 70 to the civilians that really need it. I don't see how you could cut off the entire flow of humanitarian aid just because there's a Hamas tax. That's, like I said, just tax. That's the U.S. love taxes. They should understand that concept. But it's like choking out everyone. That's really about all I have. Ramadan starts tomorrow. Ramadan Kareem. But it's almost 11:50. Chat's not very active. I think I might go ahead and wrap up. Don't have anything else on my agenda. Oh, you know what? I lied. I do. I made a tab. Okay, I'm gonna look at these two news articles, and I want to kind of dissect the biased nature of these. It's apparent that most Western news organizations they all lean towards Israel's side in this conflict. But it kills me that so many people reading the news are they're not only falling for silly things like very obviously biased infographics that people keep reposting on Instagram, which I think I need sleep. That's what I need. But okay, I'm looking at this news article. I'll try and shift it to this. People are not only falling completely for the biased language that's used in these provocative things like infographics that are made by people who are not news networks, not qualified news people, news sources, but in the actual news, like, there are still highly polarizing or like provocative language being used that's just going over people's head. I found this section of an AP article. I was reading this last night. Now, I did end up using some bit of information from this article. I did use some of the information from this article, but where was this section? Okay, maybe this is it. This is it. All right. 15 children that have starved to death. It wasn't clear if the children had underlying medical conditions that increased their vulnerability. Why is that even a relevant question? A starving child that's just skin and bone, and maybe it's up to their underlying medical condition, but starvation is starvation. How much, the populations are going to have underlying conditions anyway. But these slightly weird inclusions of something, these odd wordings are just like seemingly harmless extra little additions that get thrown into a bigger paragraph. That's not even a big paragraph, but they're just thrown into to some of this news coverage, legitimate news coverage from the Associated Press. And it's got you thinking, well, maybe they did have an underlying medical condition. And it kind of takes away from the fact that there is no food in Gaza. Mitigating the horrors is right out of the oppressor playbook. For real. I noticed this because, this feels like something they'd say about Black Lives Matter. Oh, George Floyd, he had asthma. And it had nothing to do with the police officer who had his knee on his neck and on the ground, and he was dying. But, he had asthma, so it was kind of his fault. That's the kind of stuff. I'm seeing more and more crumbs of this in other coverages. And I mentioned in my script today that I don't exactly trust sources like the Washington Post, the New York Times, especially the New York Times, about their biased information, their biased reporting on Israel and Palestine. It's like most people, if you're not reading other international news sources, then you're not really getting, if you're not checking about 80 different news sources from all across the entire world, people who are allies of Israel, people who are not allies of Israel, people from freaking New Zealand who have nothing to do with the conflict, then you're gonna consume most of this kind of language. It wasn't clear if the child had underlying medical conditions that could increase their vulnerability. That's not exactly relevant. And so I see how so many people have fallen into this blind love for Israel because it's like you don't even realize these little things. There was something else I saw on this one here. Actually, before I expose their entire thing, I'm gonna switch back. There was a whole study done a couple weeks ago, or at least it was dropped. The results dropped a couple weeks ago about some of the biased language. And I know the New York Times is one of the main culprits of giving Israel coverage of Israel in the Israel-Gaza War a lot more not soothing, but respectful language, calling Israeli deaths massacres, using very provocative language like brutal, horrendous, murderous massacres. And then for Palestinian deaths, it was just something simple like deaths. 1,200 Palestinians died, as if it's natural causes. It's not a massacre on their side as well. I don't know if I'll be able to find what I need to in this article if I'm going to keep talking like this, but I do have to get out at 12, so I got to end the stream pretty soon. But I don't know, I feel like we need a media literacy class. This has got to be something taught in schools, because this provocative language is not allowing people a whole lot of room to form their own opinions. If you're telling someone how to feel, if you're telling someone how to feel by expressing your own, your own emotions, opinions on something without explicitly saying that. I try to do that myself. I try to explicitly divorce my opinion from news coverage. But if you blend the two together on an official source like the AP, the Washington Post, the New York Times, then people are just consuming it knowing it's news, thinking that it's news, just purely news. Fox Television, including Fox TV, Fox News, 20th Century Fox, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, Community Paper, Dow Jones. What was this? What's this inclusion? If Rupert Murdoch owns it, you can't trust it. Well, yeah, 100%, of course. Fox News, but also, we can laugh at Fox all day, but if we're still reading the New York Times, and that's like on certain issues, some specific issues like Israel and Gaza, that's shifting it to the other end of the spectrum. Fox is over there, and it's so easy to look at them and say, haha, that's so obviously biased. And then you look at the New York Times, and it's just biased in a more subtle way, so they can get away with it. But I think people should be better equipped to think, okay, maybe that's a provocative word, and I should just take the word massacre and kick it to the curb, realize there were 1,200 Israeli deaths, just as there are 30,000 Palestinian deaths. One is not more of a massacre than the other. That's probably a really dumb way to say it. This is why I have to write a script, bro. I can't go off the gnome like this. I think I got that ADHD, bro. But I'm gonna wrap this up. It is practically noon, and I need sleep, bro. Don't forget to change your clocks tomorrow. Have a good spring break. Get crunk, but be safe. Back to your regular Saturday. All right, goodbye, everyone.